Hey, good afternoon. I don't need a microphone. My voice carries. I have 4 sons. I'm Melissa Dunlap, and I'm the executive director here at the museum. And we're really glad that you were able to come today. I see that some of you are not members. If you're interested in becoming a member, please ask us. We get a really nice newsletter 6 times a year. So besides a discount in the gift shop and discounts on the bus trip and other benefits. We have some programs coming up. The first one is on May 3rd, and that's a Saturday. If you have children or grandchildren, it's going to be a hands-on program at the Erie Canal Discovery Center. That's 24 Church Street. It's across from the First Presbyterian Church. And I'm not exactly sure what time that starts. Do you know, Pat?
Yes, that should be starting at noon until 3.
Noon until 3.
Yes.
So if you're interested in that. On May 17th here, we have Karen Sherwood coming, and she is going to portray a Civil War wife who is defending the home front and the farm and raising the kids while her husband's away at war. And we are also reissuing the 28th New York Volunteer Infantry Reunion Book. And the reunion book has the photos of people who served in the 28th. It has a description of all the battles of the 28th. So if you have a relative who served in that unit of the Civil War, you'll probably be very interested. But Karen is doing an excellent program, and that one starts at 1:30. So she does an excellent job herself. We also have a bus trip coming up. It's on June 7th, and that day we are going to the Buffalo History Museum. We are going to eat at the Pan American Room in the Hotel Lafayette, and then have a tour of the Hotel Lafayette. We're going to go to the, I never could think her first name, Court and Pratt House, and that is the DAR house in Buffalo. It's a beautiful house. It has a full-length portrait. Catherine, thank you. Catherine Horton. And it has a full-length portrait of Mrs. Horton, or Mrs. Pratt, that was done by Raphael Beck in the stairwell, and it is stunning. And there'll be your opportunity to see it. After that, there's going to be a guide around Buffalo describing different areas of it, and that'll be done by Anne-Marie Linneberry. So it's a really nice trip. We're more than halfway full. So if that's something that interests you, please ask us and we'll give you all the information. All right. We still have a couple people that are just coming in to sit down. We can put some chairs along the side. Yeah. So, as you can see, we have a 3-person panel, and Dick Gallagher, who had the idea for this idea of this program, and is a go-getter. As you know, he's very energetic, so he's always thinking, and he is going to introduce the 2 ladies. I know this is Mary and Mary Erdl. So, and with that, I'm going to let Dick take it away.
Okay, number 1. I don't need much of a microphone either. I'm little, but I'm loud. Okay. What I want to do first of all is tell you how grateful I am to see this many people this time of day, when you could be out enjoying the good weather, to come and listen to this show. And I hope by the time you leave here that you're going to realize that, well, it was worth it. Let's hope so. Okay, so we're ready to get this show rolling. What I want to do is put you in a frame of mind. Okay, we're on Tollgate Hill. We're heading toward Wrights Corners, all right? Let's just think about some of the places that we'll be talking about here. And I get one of the things, we got to use notes, because at my age I hardly remember my name, all right? Big Tree Inn, just after you cross the Red Creek Bridge. 2 things. You've got Big Tree Inn on the left, and also on the left, away in the back, George Graff's airfield, which was Graff Field, and this was probably, other than Lee Airport, this was one of the first ones going. And from there, we went on down, and we got Bob Smith, had a meat business there, where the Smith Collision is now, but that was where that was. Then Red Calkins. How many of you remember Red Calkins, the barber? Yeah, there you go. Red Calkins, one of the most interesting things with him, he had the family living there. And it was a small place. It was only about like what we got back of us here. And they'd all come out and fight on a Saturday night. They'd argue, and he was trying to cut hair and do the whole job. All the old farmers took the hired men over and the relatives and whatever. And it was sort of an entertainment as well as a haircut. So you got the whole thing on Saturday night. And if you got thirsty enough, the next stop was the Red Brick, which was right next door. A fellow by the name of Jimmy Nick was the last one that I remember that owned it. And I got this from Dorothy Ushhold Stoddard. I have to always think, Stoddard is a bad name for me, I cannot always remember. But I was talking to Dorothy 2 or 3 years ago. She lived upstairs over that garage that that was out in back of the big tree. Anyway, she told me Joe, her father, was basically an electrician from Buffalo. And Johnny might remember this too, I don't know. When supposedly he had something to do with the first electric light in Wrights Corners. Now, I don't know whether he stole it from Niceake or what he did, but anyway, this was what Dorothy told me. So anyway, that takes care of that. Frank Flynn's was across the street. If you got sick of Jimmy Nick's, you went over there. I mean, the beer was the same, but it cost a little less. Okay, Frank Flynn. The next was Chubby Lewis. Some of you might remember him, none of that. Chubby, I bet you Johnny, you remember him, don't you? Johnny Peterson? Sure. Yeah, there's another old timer. And anyway, Chubby was one of the first mechanics along with the John Rathke and Sons. Now, I would have a tendency to believe John Rathke probably was first, and Chubby was second because he was a little bit younger, I think. But anyway, both of these places, John Rathke and Sons, Warren, who was a JP before he died finally, well, all the way through, Junior, or Wilbur, that was Wilbur, and what was his name? Warren, yeah. Was about as high as you can get in the volunteer fire companies. I mean, they had them. And that was another one a lot of them might have forgotten. There was Junie Krentz, and Junie was a nephew, I think. Now, I don't want to be hung by what I tell you here, because it can happen. As near as to my knowledge, Junie was a nephew of either Mrs. or Mr. Rathke, and he came down, and I think it was during the Depression time. They probably sent him down so he could eat regular. I don't know. But anyway, before he got done, Junie went in the service. I remember he did his duty in North Africa. That I can just vaguely remember. And so that's John Rathke and Sons. And the other old one was the old school, which Mary is going to talk about in a second. And the last one was old George Rounds, who had the sawmill. That's all I'm going to say for now, and you're probably happy about it. So anyway, I'd like to have Mary go ahead and give us something on the old school down there.
Well, I went to school at Wrights Corners, and it was a Newfane school, District 15, and it was very modern for that day. I started school in the fall of 1936 and went there for 8 years through 8th grade. There was no kindergarten. You started in at first grade at 5 years old. And I already knew how to read from my mother. I could count to 100. I knew all the letters of the alphabet. And I had 2 older sisters, and they helped me, and I had a younger sister and a younger brother that I helped, and this is what you did in school. It was a 2-room school. The first 4 grades were on the first floor, along with a storeroom and the boys' restroom. Second floor was grades 5 through 8, and we had a very small library and the girls' restroom. There were fire escapes. There were lots of windows on the west and the south, so we had lots of fresh air and lots of sunshine, and we thought we were great. There were encyclopedias and dictionaries and all kinds of really, really great books in the library. I mean, today's libraries, we didn't have any clue what we were missing. But school was great. Our teacher was, for most of the first 4 grades, her name was Miss Putnam. What was her first name? Mildred Putnam, and then for the last 4 grades, I had Edith Swig Dietz, who drove in from Wilson. Now, we used to get snow every winter like we had this year. And Mrs. Dietz was always there. I don't ever recall school being closed. And we walked from where we lived on Slayton Settlement Road. It was 2 miles each way. We walked 4 miles a day. I probably shouldn't say this, but when I got married, Paul said, you know what, you really got good legs. All that walking and all that farm work. But anyway, my parents were farmers, and we were expected to go to school every day, but when we came home, we were expected to come right home from school, change our clothes, and go to work on the farm. That was just what it was. And Dick's father's farm and ours were side by side, only Dick was in the Roy Hart district, whereas we were in the Lockport district. About somewhere in the late 50s or early 60s, the school was closed and eventually sold, and my dad bought the bell from the belfry of the school. It did get sold when my parents sold their farm. That got sold, and I have no clue where it ended up. My husband was a great antique collector, and he wanted it, but it, for some reason or other, it got away from him. He didn't get it. But anyway, my dad was a progressive farmer. He had horses when I was first remember that, but soon we had tractors. And my younger sister Betty was probably driving a tractor by the time she was 10 or 12 years old. She was really the driver. She had a driver's license at 16. I was like 25 before I got mine. I had to get my own car before I got a driver's license. We had to be working. But going to school there was really great. We walked and we pick up kids all the way along, as you do when you live in the country. There's always somebody who's going to school with you or going home with you. And the Wick Road, with quite a bit of the end towards Slayton Settlement, was just farmland. So when winter came, they did not plow that end of the road. They only plowed to the last house, from Lake Avenue around to the last house on Wick Road, which had 2 old bachelors that my sister and I were scared to death of. Oh, Betty and I thought, oh my gosh, don't want to go by that house. And then a relative of Mary's had a great big St. Bernard that would come loping out at us, and but
That was Mary Lou. I remember that.
okay, I didn't know a name for that one, but anyway, it was fun. It was interesting, and
Out of Rassler.
out of Rassler had a
Out
big
of
one.
Rassler had a
Yeah,
dog.
that was
Yeah.
Rassler, yeah.
Yeah, but so did some of the Wicks farther up the road. They had a dog too that came out.
Did they?
Yeah.
The drunks
I didn't
that
know
worked for
that.
my father could always remember that.
Yeah, right. But it was fun, and we would sometimes walk on the tops of the snowbanks. Usually going home we do that, because if we did it going to school, we might fall through, and then you end up being cold and wet all day in school. But the school had a furnace, which a lot of us did not have in our own homes. We had the indoor plumbing, like I mentioned. The school had fire escapes. It was really very progressive for that era. And then when I went to high school, the Lockport kids on the Lockport side of the district went to Lockport, and the Newfane kids went down to Newfane School. Other than that, that's about
Which were you, Mary? Lockport?
Lockport. Yeah. We were on the Lockport side. Actually, we were very close. We were only about 3 miles from the city line, so we were pretty close. That's why we had such a long walk. The city line was at Bewley's Corner, which is the corner of 78 and or Old Niagara Road and Lake Avenue.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and there was one family there that walked from there all the way to Wrights Corners. They lived.
Was the swings there when you walked in?
Oh yes, the swings, the ball diamond.
Could you repeat the questions, because people in the back can't.
Oh, Sally asked if the swings were at school when I was there. Yes.
Maypole swings?
Yes, the maypole swings we had. And I remember once,
Clyde,
And
Cheater Totters,
yeah, and that thing that,
monkey bars.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, we did.
They ended up out behind that piece.
Yeah.
Oh, did
yeah.
they? Oh, okay, didn't know what happened
Yeah,
to a lot of that
the
stuff.
Rasky's Park,
Yeah.
oh my God.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's where they ended up.
great.
Because I remember my dad, we kind of wanted some of the equipment for our family, but Rasky's got the bid.
Yeah, they were a little bit closer in area. So, okay. this-
Chicken plucker?
Pardon me?
Were you a chicken plucker?
Was I ever, John? Chickens, turkeys, ducks, geese, you name it, we plucked them all. Yeah, that was one thing my dad did later on when he got through with the small farming. We started out farmers with lots and lots of tomatoes, and we would come home from school and pick tomatoes and wipe the mud off of them and pack them, and Dad would put them in this old car he had that he really made into almost a pickup truck. And about 3 o'clock in the morning, he'd drive up to Clinton Bailey Market, or my mother. Quite often my mother went to market. And sell to the stores in Buffalo that came to pick up the fruits and vegetables, whatever farmers had. But for us, it was primarily tomatoes. And I hated the sight of tomatoes. Yeah. But hey, it kept food on the table, and we never knew we were poor because we always had enough clothes, and we had enough to eat. And Gallagher's had meat during the rationing. The Gallagher's had meat. And, it was really it was kind of a fun life. I think growing up on a farm, you can't beat it. No, it's really great. So.
I got a couple of things that I wanted to put in. Mary probably, I know she didn't forget it, but she didn't want to beat her own drum. Herman Eldridge was probably, to my knowledge, the first man after World War II that had a New Holland baler when they first came out, and a nice new tractor, and an Ellis Chalmers combine, right? And he did custom work. I don't know how far and wide he went, but her dad was that, and we also had a lot of hard work up on our Aunt Grace's hill, which is now, what is the name of it? Candlewood Heights.
Candlewood Heights.
And
yeah.
that was her Aunt Grace's farm. So anyway, I just didn't want that to go by without acknowledging for Herman Eldridge. Okay,
Okay.
Mary,
You're gonna give me a turn?
we run out of air.
Well, because of the fact that my name is Mary Wick, and I was born on the Wick Road, I wanted to talk a little bit about the Wick Road first. Very short road just between Lake Avenue and the Sladen Settlement. But way back when, there were 3 brothers that settled down there, Henry, August, and Jacob. Henry moved to Lockwood, he didn't stay in the country. August had the farm down on the north side of the road, down below the hill. August died kind of young, he had a big family though, and the boys, Lawrence and Raymond and Carl, and there was a big family, and they took over farming. And then there was Jacob, who was my dad, and we were at the top of the hill. So he farmed, we had a big family, I'm the youngest. We also had greenhouses besides the farm doing the farm work, and raised a lot of plants, tomatoes, melons, cabbage. Tomato plants we contracted with Heinz, I should say, my dad did not mean, we would plant the seeds, my dad would. The farmers would contract for so many acres of tomatoes, and when they'd come and get the plants when we grew them, and plant them, and then come summertime, you'd see up at the corner of Old Niagara Road and Lake Avenue, old Billy Canning factory, the trucks would be lined up, waiting to go in and unload their tomatoes. That was all Heinz. And in those days, we had 4 greenhouses, and you think of greenhouses today, everything is computerized, you know, we get a bunch of things in it, more or less, they take care of themselves. And back in those days, the greenhouses had all the benches, and there would be a pit underneath the benches with a little pot-bellied stove, and it was, my dad would fire it up with coal, and you had to be more or less 24-hour duty in the spring when they were growing, the plants started growing, because it had to be warm enough in there so they'd grow. You didn't want them to get too cold because, you know, they'd freeze. If they got too warm, they'd damp off, and they had skylights, but they had to be manually done. So it was a tough time when looking back as to what it was then to what greenhouses are today. Anyhow, besides the tomato plants, my dad grew melons, and at one time he was a Niagara County melon king, and I have a picture. He was beautiful, beautiful, great big muskmelons. Bender Surprise was their name, and we were the fortunate ones, I'd say, because back then you didn't have hybrid seeds. You saved the seed from your Erie choicest melons, and of course then we got to eat the choicest melons. So it always spoiled us for when we come to get a muskmelon. But that was just one of the many things that helped. And as Mary had said, you went to school, you come home, you change your clothes, and you worked the farm. And it taught us a lot, in a sense, as I grew up. Well, I didn't think so at the time, because it seemed like a lot of work. But, you know, we learned work ethics that kids just don't seem to have today. They all want to get a paycheck, but they don't really want to put any effort into the work that they do. Whereas back in those days, as my dad always would tell us, if you do it right the first time that you're told, you don't have to go back and do it again. So in other words, you'd be wasting time if you kind of tried to slide through it. It didn't work that way. Mary talked about going to school over at Wrights Corners. Well, of course, I did too, and we'd walk over there. Of course, we had to go home at lunchtime because there was no cafeterias. In fact, when I went there, which was before Mary, the water you pumped from a pump, and they didn't have the indoor boys and girls restrooms. We went outside. We had to go outside to the outhouses. But there again, and it was always like she said, 4 grades down, 4 grades up. And one teacher to teach 4 grades was a lot. But you know, the kids back in those days didn't sit and talk or turn around and run around. They sat in their seats. You know, they behaved in school, in other words. There wasn't time for them. And we always had recess, and they had the playground out there so you could run off your energy. It was very good, really. Let's see, what else did I remember I wanted to talk about? Oh, what we used to do as kids when we did have free time. We made our own fun. Didn't have people organizing your fun times and your activities. We got together as friends at one another's houses. You'd make fudge, or maybe you'd make popcorn, or popcorn balls. Once in a while, if it was nighttime, we'd even play spin the bottle. That was really wild. That was really wild. But we had a lot of fun doing it. And like Mary said, even though it was Depression time and we were poor, everybody else was poor too. And we had enough to eat because we lived in the country. We didn't really want for, I mean, material things maybe we didn't have, but the necessary things we sure did have. And my mother came from Buffalo. She had been a secretary. She wasn't a farm girl, so to speak. But so she did the housework and, you know, the cooking and the sewing and the cleaning and stuff. So I never really learned much about cooking at home, like you normally would. But there was a little restaurant called Drake's Restaurant over at Wrights Corners. The school was on the corner, and it was right next to it on the north side, in front of the old red brick house that was round.
Yep.
Okay.
Gotcha.
And Bert and Mueller Drake run that. No relation to the other Drakes in Wrights Corners. But I went to work there, and I was only 14, 15. That was tall for my age. They didn't ask your age. I mean, you know, they always said if anybody comes in, you tell them you're 16.
Yeah.
I mean, I wasn't, but, you know. And I learned to cook over there. I learned, they had chicken and biscuit was one of their specialties. And Bert showed me how to make the biscuits, and eventually that was my job. They had all kinds of different, on the weekends, you know, they'd have Virginia baked ham or roast pork, et cetera, et cetera. And I learned all these things, but I learned them there, but which did, in the years to come, thank God I knew how to cook. So they had a bunch of kids to feed. But when I first started, I'd have to be over there at 6 o'clock in the morning. It was summertime. This was Model City time. There were people old enough to remember when they were doing all that building down there. And the trucks would come up from Rochester way and stop there for breakfast. So I was a short order cook. And you learn by doing. You know, whether they wanted their eggs sunny side up or over easy or scrambled or omelets or whatever they wanted. But I learned how to cook over there. And that always has served me well. So growing up in Wrights Corners, and I still do live on Wick Road. I don't know if I mentioned that or not, because I lived there until I got married and we built our house. Then I moved across the road. So and I'm still on the wiki. And I hope to stay there for any years I have left. Okay, it's your turn, Dick.
Here we go again. Boy, I thought I was all done lying, but here we go. Okay. I'm gonna give you some names here that we'll cover as quick as we can, so when we get done, if there's some give and take that you wanna talk about anything here, feel free. But if we wanna get our stuff across first, so that it gives us some meat to chew on. Okay, George Brown's in the sawmill, right in the center of Wrights Corners, right? I remember it from about 1938, 39. My father used to go over there and get sawdust from under the old steam engine for the gutters, when we cleaned the gutters in the barn, and we only had about 20 cows then, those days. That was a lot, average anyway. And that's how I met old George. And the funny thing about George, to me, he was a little fella about my size, but for some reason or other, I always thought he looked like an owl. I don't know why.
He was, that's why they called him Moni. He had big eyes.
Yeah,
eyes.
and a little mustache. Yeah, see, I remember.
And not to interrupt you,
No.
but let me, that makes me
Sure.
think of Boney Rounds, the sawmill. They also did cider.
Oh.
When it was cider time, they had the presses there, because we'd go over from school, over with the Gates girls, we'd go over there and they'd let us have some fresh cider right out of the bucket things, you know.
I used to go over to old Jack Raff's on Sunpike Road. That wasn't fresh. That was well aged.
This was fresh cider, right from the apples.
I had now this is, we're all 18 and over and that. I had a traveling business about 1947 or 48. I had two different bulls, a side house, a Holstein bull and a short one, and a boar hog. And I used to advertise in the retailer even. And I'd go over and take care of the man's cows or whatever. Old Jack had a couple of cows over there, and old Jack always tried to trade you off a gallon of cider for the business, you know. So anyway, that's how I got to know how to do the business with him. But anyway, old George, with the sawmill, he was known worldwide, probably almost to our way of thinking, on his ladders. He built mainly they were ladders, as I remember, Johnny, weren't they more for fruit picking and that? But I don't know if I don't remember ever seeing an extension ladder there, but they were all sizes of ladders and log rollers. Back in those days, we didn't have color packers and stuff like this and all this hydraulic run machinery. And he had the finest log rollers in the area. They came probably from Batavia to buy these rollers. And old George, he was as fussy about that as if it was somebody building a Swiss watch. But anyway, that takes care of George Brown's. The other thing that I'm more familiar with was George Graff. Graff, of course, had the first airport in the area. And he also, some of you may have heard or connected with even, the Civil Air Patrol. During the war, you could not get aviation gas. George Graff got aviation gas because he came up with the idea of the Civil Air Patrol, which was centered right there from Lockport. They drew from all over. And he had gas for the whole term of the war. So anyway, that took care of that. Harry Gindi. Anybody remember Harry Gindi? Okay, Harry Gindi actually was a City of Lockport man. And, but he had a farm down across from Johnny, down on the lake, or on the creek, Red Creek, down right where the bridge is, between the bridge and the railroad tracks, which is a very small area. And he had a few animals and whatever.
Two good swimming holes.
Yep. And you didn't need to wear a shirt either, did you?
At that swimming hole, the boys all had to wear suits, because he came down and checked us somehow. It was down at the Hermit's Hole, down on the Wick Road, that the boys didn't wear the suits. They didn't have, we weren't allowed down there.
How come you didn't?
I never did. I went down to Gindi. We had to walk a mile to go swimming.
Anyway, going back to Harry, he had the coal business in Lockport. That was his big thing, was a coal business. And down there, you picture the railroad tracks, and there was a small siding coming on the side toward Wrights Corners. This was a covered siding where he would have coal car come in and park there. There was a roof all the way over and attached to another building, which this morning I was by there, the building still stands. I don't know what was in the upstairs part of it at the time, but he had a store.
Well, yeah, but he used to live down there, probably.
Did he? These are things that's why we're here. She can fill me in on stuff like that. I never knew he lived down there. But anyway, he had this store, and the oldest son, which he had 4 or 5, and the oldest one, Bob, ran the store, didn't he? Yeah. And he had the scales in the middle, so if you had a pig or a load of hay or whatever you wanted to do, you could pull in there, and for a small, a little bit of money, you could pay to have that weighed and whatever. So that took care of Harry Gindi. Just want to check. Ray Durling, we all better remember old Ray Durling. And first fire chief of Wrights Corners. To my knowledge, there was nobody ever before.
No,
And he was a great collector of
antiques.
army memorabilia. I bought a great big shelf from him, rode a bicycle over to got it from a buck or two from him, and because he had excess of them. Now, okay, Fred, and I always get this screwed up. Ilda or Hilda Duhu. Was it I-L-D-A or H-I-L-D-A?
Hilda, wasn't it?
Huh?
I think it was Hilda.
Hilda, well, my hearing was bad even then. So I probably messed up. But anyway, they were two of the hardest working people as a family that I remember at the original fire hall, and just throwing it right in there, the first dances, Cronenberg Hall. Who remembers that?
I know, yes.
Boy, those were the days. We really had some good times there, right? And then when they built the first fire hall, and Johnny, probably your family was involved in this too. I know, I think Harry or Herman Eldridge, anybody that had a team of horses in those days had what we used to call a clam. And it was like a wheelbarrow without a wheel. And a sharp edge and 2 handles, and you go into the dirt, get that loaded up, and take it to where you were going to dump it over, and the next guy was behind it. That's how they dug the cellar for the first fire hall, as I remember that. And all the farmers, my dad had a team there, and probably anybody we could name that had a team of horses in those days had it there. And Mrs. Rathke, Emma.
Oh, yeah.
All right. Remember when we had the first fire hall, it was actually in Rathke's garage. And the telephone setup, that came into Rathke's house. And Emma is a great big woman, as I remember. And Emma had a very high-pitched voice. and Emma would, when the fire call came in, she would run out, and there was a board, I think it was a chalkboard if I remember right. She would write on it in chalk where the fire was, because there was no cell phones and stuff like that. People came from every direction that belonged to the fire company, and they would check that chalkboard and away they'd go. And that's the way they learned how. In the old days, they had the first tanker. John Rathke was the first master mechanic, right? As near as I remember. A couple other ones. Bud Kelly and Harry Kelly. Harry was a peace justice. They lived up on Slayton Settlement Road then, in the old homestead, right?
Yeah, in the cobblestone house.
Yeah, just in on the north side. And so Harry was, I wrote it down here, probably again, insurance company.
He was insurance.
Mutual, Grange Mutual. That he was our insurance agent from the time he started until he passed on. But, and Bud Kelly, I worked with Bud, he was a little bit older than me, but I worked with him at Davis Dairy. So, all right. Music and dance halls, Cronenberg Hall, as we said, that was before, I would say in the 30s, was it? Late 30s?
That was in the 30s, and I recall it very much because it was a kind of a community thing. I mean, it was like a fire company dance, you might say, the square dance, but it was, I remember Ray Witt, Ernie Rosser. Ray used to play sax. Ernie would play the fiddle. There were different ones of those.
Ernie Rosser?
Ernie Rosser, yeah.
I never knew that.
And they were the first ones to do the music. And we'd have a square dance. But you went, and Bud Kelly, you mentioning him, makes me think, he always used to say, you never want to take a date to to the dances because you wanted to be able to dance with everybody. You didn't have
Exactly.
to worry about being, tied down to one person.
And if
And you
you-
did dance with everybody. I mean, the young and the old combined, you didn't, it was a lot of fun.
And if you were either handsome or rich,
Didn't make any
you were ready to go. No problem. The,
Just had a good time.
now you're talking about dance halls. Do you remember on Wheeler Road, next to Dan Schmidt, on Wheeler Road, on the north side of Wheeler Road, there was a big, the house is still there. I only can remember going there once with my folks, and I wound up asleep. I was probably, 4 or 5 years old, or 6, whatever, but I wound up asleep in one of the bedrooms on top of everybody's coats and everything. But they had a dance in there, and I just vaguely heard of was it Dougal? We used to call him Dougal, but it was Duchow, whatever. Duchow, I guess the way it would be pronounced.
But that was
But-
a fancy family that lived in there though.
Yeah, but they opened it up more or less.
I don't remember any dancing down there. But
I only can remember going there once, but it just small 3-piece band, probably put together, maybe they passed the hat when it was all said and done, whatever. But anyway, dances, all right, let's go back just a little bit to the first real fire hall that Wrights Corners had.
the big one.
During the war, as I can remember, different ones said about it, they would have 300 and 400 people there on a Saturday night, right, Johnny? Yep, there you are. There's a guy
And what was
that
the
spent all his
orchestra?
years. Huh?
What was the orchestra? Come on. The orchestra that they had the guys.
Rudy
Rudy
Kumon,
Kumon.
the best there ever was.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think. You could be deaf, dumb, and blind, and you could still enjoy that music. But
They were a lot of fun.
as I remember, Rudy Kumon, very accomplished. He could play anything, even swinette. Anyway, he all right. Okay. All right. As near as I can remember, and Johnny maybe can back me up on this, didn't he teach most of the fire companies, you too probably, how to march and taught them band instruments? He played about everything you could think of. Wasn't that right, Rudy Kumar? I thought all the local in South Lockport and maybe Newfane and Wrights Corners, I don't know how far out he went beyond that, but he was a terrific guy, and they had a terrific band. Old Joe Mahar, he was the caller, great caller. And, okay. Okay, how about you, got a little something else you want to talk to him
Well,
about?
my dad was always very good to my mother. My mother had everything in the house that he could possibly afford in the line of luxuries. He put more money into the house than he did into the barn and the chicken houses and what have you. But he rebuilt the kitchen, and she had a propane tank and cooked up to her stove instead of either a cook stove, which she cooked on in the wintertime, or a kerosene stove she cooked on in the summer. And Hauser's at Wrights Corners had the propane business. And oh, that was just fantastic for my mother. She was in seventh heaven with that. Suitses were still very much in business. They did the flowers for my wedding in 1955. And by then it was John that was doing it. His father, I guess, had retired. Do you remember Bell's Candy Shop in Wrights Corners?
Down there. That was Johnny's Gin before it was Ball's Candy. That was another gin mill that was right there.
And,
This was a high-class restaurant.
no, it was just a candy.
That was a candy. That was Ball's Candy, but that was,
And he made his own candy, and I believe he made it all there. And on Saturday night before Easter, the day before Easter, after supper, my dad would, if he felt like it, he'd take some of the kids with him, but sometimes he just went by himself, because he'd go over and he'd buy everybody something in the line of candy for Easter. It was all on sale. Maybe it was broken, but that was our Easter basket, per se. And the same thing with Christmas. He used to save $2 bills. And he said as many $2 bills as he could save. That's what kind of a Christmas we had. That wasn't true. But I mean, we were always looking for $2 bills when he got change. But actually, a lot of the time there was no money passed. It was just barter. He'd trade eggs and chickens and stuff for flour and whatever my mother needed to cook with. But it was, Wrights Corners was a fun place, and Mary mentioned Drake's. I think, Mary, by the time I got there, that was a little grocery store. Or at least they sold a few groceries or something, because we could go buy penny candy there.
Phil, you got that down at Phil's. didn't
No,
you?
no, I'm
You
good
got,
with
well,
it.
they might have had penny candy there.
We used to go get penny
Yeah,
candy
yeah,
in
yeah, I
there.
think you could get penny candy there.
Dick and Phil's,
Yeah,
right?
Dick.
There you go,
Something
that
I
was.
Yeah, something I was going to mention too that I kind of forgot. You know, when you're kids, even when you're in your teens and all, back in those days, you didn't say, Dad or Mom, you know, you gotta take me here, you gotta take me there, like the kids do today, they want to be run everywhere. There was bus service. We were very fortunate that we had bus service. Okay, Ralph Weeks had the Ridge Road Express. One came from Jetto, the other ones came up Walker Way. And when we went on to school, into high school, you went up to the end of the road, no buses came pick you up. You went up the end of the road and got the regular bus. And the buses ran pretty regular, and there was, you know, late in the afternoon, because they actually catered more to people working like at Harrison's and stuff. But even though we were just going to school, that's the bus we rode. But we were able to be able to get to the city, so to speak, because we never would have gotten there if we expected, Dad, would you take me? Because Dad was too busy working the farm to be, you know, you didn't even ask because you knew better. But thank God there was bus service, and they actually, even then, sometimes you could summer ride.
Yeah, a nice
It was
neighbor.
loud, and it seemed to be a kinder, gentler period than what is today. Today, you wouldn't even think of letting your kids catch a ride to go somewhere. But in those days, because it was basically all community anyhow, and they all knew you, knew who you were, knew who you belonged to, and so you could catch a ride and think nothing of it. But we were fortunate to have bus service.
Hey, those were great times.
Yes, they were good times.
Hibbard's ice cream, or custard.
Thank God they're coming back to
Yes,
this.
amen. I was just gonna mention that, I see they're
They're gonna be right at the end of the Wick Road.
Right! That was one of the first ice cream places to have Wrights Corners.
When they came to Wrights Corners, my Steve, who at that point must have been going on 16, I don't know how old he had to be, but it would seem like, he went over to apply for a job. And Lowell Dickinson got there first. Lowell got the job, but then Lowell had an accident and broke his leg. So Steve ended up getting the job, and he had it until he couldn't have it any longer. And then the next son coming along, Dan, was able to take it from there. So the both of them worked at Hibbard's. And Hibbard's was there for a good long time, and that was the real deal. No, I mean,
The first custard that I ever remember having.
well, that was a real custard, that wasn't packaged stuff. And they're coming back, and every time I go by the end of the road, they're working on that little place. They were gonna do it last year, and then the deal didn't go through,
I
right?
was
So,
surprised that the fire company didn't latch onto that property.
I don't know, but it's going together now very well, and just can't wait till the,
Yeah, that does have a very good.
open.
I got one that I just have, making notes here as I go along, because my memory is not too good anymore. Okay, Carrie Gates, and I see her daughter, I think it is, down there, and I've known her since we were together as kids. And as I remember, Carrie was Clarence Round's sister, right?
Right.
Okay, now I got, then your older sister married Junie Krebs, right?
Down.
I was just old enough to appreciate their looks and shapes, but I forgot all the rest. Anyway, so I wanted to get that tie-in there. And the other thing, we mentioned on the Rosslers, Ernie, I just vaguely knew him. He passed on pretty early, I think, pretty young, didn't he, Helen? I thought, but Helen here is Ernie's daughter, and Ernie and Otto were brothers, weren't they, or cousins?
They were brothers.
Yeah. Okay, so they lived probably 500 feet from each other at the most. One lived on the, right next to the bridge on Red Creek, and the other one lived right on the 90-degree corner. Otto did. I was more familiar with Otto because he lasted longer and whatever, and he grew the sweetest peas because whenever he would go by, we'd go out and rip off a bunch of peas off his truck when he was going up to the pea vinery up on Slate
We
Settlement
had to
Road.
pick up the ones that dropped off.
Well, we didn't even wait for that. We just made sure in case he didn't drop any.
They were great.
Bill Pearson and I, there's a Red Aiken. A lot of never knew Red too much. Red lived right across the street from Bucalo Greenhouse on Slate and Settlement. Right? The foundations are still there from the old Bucalo Greenhouse. And one of the interesting things, if you haven't been by there lately, Aikens lived way back up in, it was a long driveway, probably about 300-400 feet back in. And I used to kind of go up and hang around. They had 2 daughters up there, and I used to hang around, you know. That's all. That's all I was allowed to do. Anyway, the thing with it was, in a couple of weeks ago, I noticed a home going up, and I don't know who it is. Maybe if somebody in here knows who it is.
Something like McElway or something like that?
Well, is it McFarland?
No.
Oh, it's not. I thought it might have been.
It's McFarland sold the land to this person.
All right, back when, I'm going to say this is back in the early 50s, which we weren't going to go into that, but the only reason we got, you know how it goes. Anyway, Red Aiken and Junior, they always loved to fly.
Yes.
And they finally bought an airplane, but they couldn't fly, or they had no license. So I worked with them to get them going get them up to a point where they could get their license and everything. They had a north-south runway. You used to have to take off downhill and land uphill. Because that's the way it is around these parts with the wind. Anyway, the other thing we didn't mention, we did mention Bob Suits. There was one, Hugh Mulvey. When I was talking about barbers, we only had 2 that I can ever remember in Wrights Corners. And of course, the one was Red Calkins, and he was as crazy as a bed bug. I mean, you had to be crazy to go there, and we all went there. So anyway, Hugh Mulvey he came from a big family. Mulvey family was a big family here in Lockwood, and Huey was always connected with sports. And when Ward Reed had the SO football team going, he was always like the trainer or whatever. You know, if you fell down and hurt yourself, he'd go over and give you some spelling salts and stuff like that. But he was a barber, and one of the things we always took the highway. I had been over there to get a haircut once a month or once every 3 months, whatever. Anyway, Huey used to get a little excited when you ask him about a ball game. They used to call him Huey the Hacker. There was times you questioned whether you should have gone there or gone somewhere else because you had to wait maybe a month until you got her shaped up again. But I had forgotten about it. I have it written down here, but I missed it. This is rather. Just want to check.
We didn't want to do it here.
Oh, we got one.
Yes, Rose is back there.
Where's Rose?
She's shy.
Tony built our house.
She's shy.
She's
here.
She's
Oh.
the blonde back. It was
Oh,
pink
there
color.
you- Tony built our house on Crescent Drive.
Oh, yeah.
They had Tony and Bob, I think it was Spencer or something, I can't remember, he was a character. I mean, he used to get on the wacky tobacco every so often, and I've still got places in my house where the level, it was level at one time, and then you look at it, and it isn't settled, then you look at it again, and check it another way, and it looks right, so, but that was quite a deal. But anyway, Bucalo greenhouses, this was a big thing, and old Tony, your dad, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Those boys were notorious for getting out at night with that old, was it a Dodge truck you had? Jimmy was the oldest, I think, wasn't he?
No, Sano was.
Huh?
Sano.
Oh, yeah? Well, I had an idea it was Jimmy. Well, anyway, they used to take, and old Tony was, old timers, pretty strict, you know. They pushed this truck over to the Eldridge's Hill. And then they could all get her going good and jump on, and they'd sneak over to Wrights Corners to get some ice cream or whatever they wanted. And they'd come back and they'd get her going like hell, and they come up the hill and pull her in to shut it off. And old Tony, I don't know if he ever knew it, but those boys were notorious. But these are some of the minor things that you think about. Now, has anybody else got anything here that they're thinking about? One of the things, before I forget it, Don Burrows, he's quite connected with Wilson, and he's putting on a program much like this. Gotta look here close. April 28th, and Memories of, do you remember Memories of Wilson? That's at 7 p.m. If you enjoyed this type of a thing, and you have a little connections to Wilson or people that lived over there, you'd enjoy this. The only thing is, it's 7 at night, and look at the crowd we pulled at 2 in the afternoon. See, this is my time too. 7 o'clock, I'm half asleep. By 8, I'm totally gone. Okay, I just wanted to make sure I got everything here. You know that, as near as I know, Don, didn't you tell me that Old George Round's steam engine is the one that's out at conference now?
Yes,
Yeah, okay.
all restored,
Huh?
all restored.
All restored, what, $8,000 for a new
Boiler.
boiler?
Sent out to Ohio.
So, and you think getting a new boiler is gonna cost you big money in your house?
Just
There you
sulfur
go.
reactor.
But, they have a doings right after Labor Day, is it something?
Well, after the Alexander Steam Show,
Yeah.
and this should be the year, they alternate every other year.
Yeah, who do they alternate with again?
Harris Steam Farm up in Cambria.
Yeah. So anybody that's enjoyed that type of stuff, the old-time farm machinery and threshing and all that, Don is one, Don, there you go.
Offset.
Come on, I've only known him 60 years, but this is what happens, I don't know. When you get as old as I am, maybe you run into this every so often. Trying to introduce somebody, you know, two people, you've known them for years, you can't think of either name. Boy, does that put you in a
This
spin.
show will not be advertised. This show will not be advertised.
It won't be advertised.
No, they don't advertise.
Yeah, well, anyway,
Just word of mouth.
well, it sometimes goes better because when you do that, you get the clientele there that have got a bona fide interest in it. And this is what you're looking for.
Well, they mentioned earlier Karen Sherwood, and she's the one that really runs the whole show there. And I asked her a couple years ago, how come they didn't advertise? And she said they didn't want any riffraff there. They just wanted people.
Well, that lets me out.
Makes sense. So you get the people who are really, really
Oh,
interested,
well, sure.
and that's what you want.
Yeah, that's what, one thing these notes, they're in no order, obviously, because I've been doing this for about 2 years, trying to put this thing together, to get people interested enough to do it. Anyway, does anybody, you might, Johnny, remember, I can vaguely remember at Rathke's, there was a flood in Cincinnati, and a lot of, the place that where you went in the front door was all kinds of stuff piled up that people had donated to send down there. Do you remember that at all? I can just vaguely remember it, and maybe somebody would have remembered it. I did. The other thing that I mentioned anybody will remember, and I used to play on it every time we went down there, they had a cast iron thing with a world and with an eagle on top of it. It probably stood about this high, and I guess every kid, yeah, it was right in front of the building. Yeah, and it said case on it for the case. I think every kid that ever went there played on that thing, that case thing. And okay, just go through quick here to make sure we got everything, and then we'll open this up for some. Yeah, let's see. Like we said, Bob Suits Flowers, Mary covered it. Yeah, that's good. And one thing, there was a fellow that I always remember, old Jack Mulcahy, but he wasn't known by that. He was Jack Mulcahy.
Yeah.
And Jack, he did have a problem with Jim Beam.
Friends? Were they friends?
Very close. Very close. But anyway, Jack, when he was sober, Boney Rounds would let him take that thing to the moon because he was capable. It was just he just, like I said, he was willing, but he just wasn't able. But anyway, he'd get a little canned up every so often, like once a week or something like that. Anyway, Jack would often move the machine for Boney, because Boney had an old Packard, if I remember right, wasn't Packards that he always drove, Packard coupe. It looked like it was going to be going out for winter because the back end was laying down like this. He had everything that he ever had as far as tools and whatever in there, and so he'd often drive that wherever, and Jack would move the machine from up on Day Road, maybe down to Ewing's Road. About as far as he went, as I remember, was the Cure Farm down on right near across from Bice in that area on 104. Well, he went down to Vinings, that's right. He didn't go there. But that pretty well covers that. I just want to go through these to make sure. Old George Rounds was another thing. Chicken chowder. Everybody came for miles, right? I remember your dad he loved the chowder. And he was known all over because he had a pretty good formula, whatever it is you do. I mean, you start with the chicken, the rest of it, you got your head.
My dad, I mean, I have a picture at home with Johnny from Johnny's Hymns.
Yep.
And
Was
my
he the little
father-
crippled fella?
And my father was in it too, and they were stirring the big kettle with their big paddle thing for the chowder. That was over by the back end of the. It wasn't over by it was, no, it was before the fire. It wasn't the old fire.
Well, it could be. I remember that there was.
What's the old fire?
Yeah, well, the only thing I was thinking, right there where Wheeler Road comes out, across this way, it was the beginning of Bowers Blacktop, as I remember. And there was a little fella there that was crippled. You remember him?
Yeah.
I can't.
That wasn't Johnny from Johnny's Hymn, but he was with him.
Oh,
Oh, what was his name? I know what you're talking
see,
about.
yeah, now see when you start. Now you know what it is. Before I was in it.
Yeah, I know what you're talking
One
about.
other one that slipped my mind, and it can't go unnoticed. Clark's Charcoal Grill. Who remembers that? All right. Figure that, I remember I was going to a little alley down on Williams Road, and she used to meet me over there. I used to get a cherry cooler, or an orange cooler, whatever, you know, and she'd ride her bicycle way over, she was lived over where Davis Dairy was. She'd ride herself all the way over there, and we'd meet, and that's as close as we got, but at least we met. And but anyway, those were the days of pies and the things that Mrs. Clark incidentally just passed away in this, was it the spring?
February.
105?
Yeah.
Look at that. Now, how many of you in here expect to make it that far?
Why not?
Boy, I love your confidence.
My mother's 101, so
I wouldn't,
and my mother is 100, so that's why I think
so, you know, let's look at the bright side though. There are a lot of people that are in their high 90s now. I mean, it's amazing to what it used to be, whether it's the weather or the water or the whatever we're digging to eat or whatever. Maybe it's good living. You know, that might be good.
How old are you?
I was 82 2 weeks ago. So there you are. So I got a ways to go.
You know how old I am because we're the same age, except you've already had your birthday and I haven't had mine yet, John. He had his birthday, he is 90.
Oh yeah, you turned 90? No kidding. Congratulations. Happy birthday.
Mine doesn't come to the end of the year, so he's older than me.
Yeah, you didn't see the train of thought? Yeah. Oh, I know what it was. You remember the first time we met? How did you know?
God, no.
We were at...
How old are you?
That's why you avoided me. Okay. I remember we were at Wrights Corners doing some kind of a thing where we had to sit down and eat. And I sat down and you said something to me about, oh, you're left-handed. Yeah, right? We're both left-handed. And it turns out all three of us are left-handed, so we're in good shape. A little underhanded maybe, but not... Okay.
It never seemed to obstruct anything, being left-handed.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. The other, well, now, of the cars, or of the wicks,
Of the way.
how many are left right now?
My brother, Sherwood, and myself.
Surrounding you.
We're at
Which one was the pilot in World War II?
North.
Okay, I always remember he
Came over Wrights Corners.
Yep.
In the B-24 battle.
right? I remember that almost a long ransom to turn around. Yeah, I remember these things.
Remember that?
Yeah, see that?
Well, we knew he was gonna do it, and he wasn't supposed to do it, but he did it anyway.
Well,
Because he was going overseas. and he-
how many of you in there did things that you weren't supposed to do?
Well, they didn't.
I could write a book.
They didn't, you know, it was okay that he did it. They didn't want him to do it.
I just let me check a couple of things here. As long as we got you here under captivity, I just don't want to miss anything. I've been doing this stuff for like 2 years now, and you can see why it's all on all kinds of different note paper and everything. Can you imagine trying to remember this stuff? Oh,
Another thing we used to always do besides sledding and all that. I skate on a creek, all up and down the creek. But they were cold winters, obviously, because the ice would stay nice and frozen solid, and only once or twice did anybody ever go through. You know.
I was gonna say, pretty soon, let the other people talk a little bit.
oh yeah, yeah. Well, okay, one thing that, was there some sort of a store on the corner where that gas station is in Wrights Corners right now?
Yeah, it was Suits's.
So,
What was her first name?
that was before my time.
Johnny's sister, I can't remember her first name, was right on the corner. I remember stopping there on the way to school many a time.
Hey, can I ask a question?
From now on, it's yours because I've covered everything. I can't even think of a lie to tell you.
Okay, why did they call the fire hall Cronenberg Hall?
That I couldn't tell you. Probably, I think it was the Cronenberg family.
It belonged to the Cronenbergs, that's
Was
why.
it? The old judge?
Yeah, Judge Cronenberg.
Okay.
That's where they had their first meeting.
It was part
Didn't
of
they own
their
half the
property.
land down here at Wrights Corners?
Pardon?
Didn't Cronenberg's own half the land at Wrights Corners?
Very possibly. In those days, some of the families.
Down here at the intersection.
That was the Cronenberg farm and then, did he donate the land?
No.
That's where the fire hall had the first meeting was
Yeah, at the
Cronenberg Hall.
Cronenberg Hall. I mean, it was there, it was a building.
Well, it wasn't a fire, built
No,
for fire.
no, it wasn't for the, but they were able to use it to have their dances and stuff because it was a good sized place. I don't know what it might have been even before they did the dances. I don't remember that far back, but it did belong to the Cronenbergs.
Was it next to Foster's Food Market there?
No, Foster's was, it was by the, it was by the church, it was just before the church. Yeah, it was closer to the Y.
Yeah, there was a wide, there was Cronenberg Hall, then there was Bob Wagner's gas station on it.
Yeah.
Skeets had it for a while, did he?
Huh?
Skeets, didn't Skeets have that?
He's on where Yellow Goose is.
They, I never knew about that store. And,
Yeah, I
Bob
can't,
King was another one of the mechanics there, had a station.
but it was a Suits, it was on the John's sister, and I can't, at the moment, can't remember her first name.
How long did that last?
I was just a little kid.
Yeah, because I had just vaguely remembered the thing being there. So has anybody got anything?
It's got a little humorous thing to tell. One day I was flying back into Buffalo from town, and the man next to me had a tie on with a tie bar and it had a card carrier on it. He put new cards on. And I says, "What a tie thing?" He said, "Yeah." She says, "When you land in Buffalo, you'll see my father and my company down there." And we got talking. He said, "Where are you from? What do you do?" I said, "Well, I live in Wrights Corners." He said, "Well, when I was a kid," he says, "I used to go there pheasant hunting." And we all we had good pheasant hunting back then. And I says, he said, "We used to go to Bob Whalen's," he says, "on the Wheeler Road."
That was the name of the place.
Yep.
That was Whalen's.
And I
That was
says,
the place
"Well, I
he was
just live
talking
down the
about.
road from there, you know." Bob drives by my house all the time in his big black Lincoln and a suit coat, and this is probably in the 60s. And he said, "Yeah," he said, "well, he's one of our designers." He said, "We would have, go to his place and go pheasant hunting, and at noon they would have food catered in for our lunch." He says, "One day I was there," he says, "and I tied my Irish setter out the tree out back," he says, "and got washed up for lunch, and there was a big commotion at the head of the table where the ham was, and my dog got loose and I had that ham." The Buffalo bills would come on opening day of pheasant season to Wrights Corners Fire Hall. We would have a hunter's breakfast on that first day when it opened up, and those guys, after playing ball on Sunday, would have Mondays off, and maybe half a dozen of them would show up at Wrights Corners for their breakfast at 6 o'clock in the morning, then they'd go off pheasant hunt. So they'd have their clipboards and stuff, and they'd be going over their plays and whatever. End of story.
Hey Dick,
Yes, sir.
the Peterson house was the first one to have electricity on 104, and they were the first house to have natural gas.
No kidding, the Peterson house. You're
Where I live.
where you live now.
Yep.
Well, did you know anything about that, what Dorothy was saying about the first electric light in Wrights Corners? Now,
I
don't know if
hadn't heard
was-
that, but
See-
they brought the electricity down from the corners and the gas, and we were the first house to get both of them.
There you are. I didn't know this until she was telling me, when Ushholz first came down from Buffalo, they operated the red brick. And
The red
then
brick?
after, huh?
The brick,
The red brick, they operated it before he bought, where the big tree
Big
is
tree.
now. But I'm just taking it for what she said for me, you never know. But she had no reason to lie, but maybe the mind is like mine, wanders at times. So what are you gonna do? But anyway, how about anybody else we got pictures up here, some that have been brought in that you're welcome to come up and look at.
Could I say something?
Sure.
My name is Rob Stranges, or Bob Stranges, and my dad was Paul. My mom is Lucille. So I grew up in the... What's it?
Sister is Paul.
My dad is Paul. My sister is Paula. Do you know her? Okay. Well, and I grew up with your son Billy. I went to school. So anyways, we lived on the corner of Wick Road and Lake Avenue. Yes.
Yeah.
I'm alive today. I'm alive today. I was in the house that blew up. I was in the house, and my parents were in Florida.
Wait, weren't they?
What's that?
Weren't they out of town?
They were away,
Yeah.
and there was a gas explosion that I didn't cause. People thought I did, but I did not. The house blew up, as you know. The walls blew off the foundation and landed on the side. I was in front of the door that blew. It was a basement door that blew me off the side and blew the house up. And I thank the fire department, who did the best they could to contain the fire. It did burn up. But I appreciate that. What I want to say too is I've been an educator for 35 years in Michigan. And as I reflect on my roots, I thank all of you and your families who taught me and my friends who I grew up with work ethics. Because as you said, today's youth, most of them are good with working hard, but some are not. And so that was my job, that you all taught me to teach good work ethics, especially my mom and dad. But anyways, very quickly, in terms of my memories, the fire hall was the hub of Wrights Corners. So as kids, when the rides would come in, my sister and brothers and I would stay up at night without my parents knowing, look out the window and watch which rides would go up, and we were figuring out what was going up and where, and we would help. My dad wasn't happy, but we would help the carny people with the rides, getting them water and that kind of thing. And I do remember the chicken chowder that was going on at the new firehouse along the side with the big wooden paddles. We used to buy a lot of chicken chowder there. And of course the parades that you all worked hard at and putting on for us, and the Easter egg hunt. So I have a lot of fond memories. And as I said, I'm from Michigan, and I wanted to come back to say thank you all.
Were you explosion?
What's that?
Were you hurt at all in the explosion?
Thank God, the only thing that my hair was singed, which didn't cause it to be gray. And, pretty much my hair was singed, and that was it. I had to open the door, which was at an angle, and crawl out to get out.
I thought it was unoccupied.
No, my brother Jim and I were home in the house at the
Brother
time.
was in there with you too.
Jim
Jim was.
was in the house at the time. So right now, Hibbard's, which
Yeah.
you talked
Oh,
about,
Everett's is gonna
his
be.
bought our old
in their
garage.
garage.
I took a picture yesterday. They bought the garage and they're gonna turn it into a hibber. So we're really excited about that. And it's interesting, as I talked to my mom, Dad, after our house burnt down and he would go there to, clean up things, he always wanted to start an ice cream place there. And never did, and guess what's happening? It's starting there.
He had a retro garage sale there for quite a
Always,
while.
yeah, because your husband used to come down and bother him,
I
hug him. Yeah. He loved it.
I got a question for you.
Yes, sir. What's that?
Was your mother's maiden name Krebs?
She's right here, Lucille Krebs.
Lucille?
Yeah.
Oh, I gotta go down and give her a hug.
That's
You
my
don't-
mother.
You don't remember me, do you?
Yes, I
Do you? I had a case on you, did you know? But I had a case on all.
Be careful.
Right. Yeah, but you're not that old. You're still a baby, for God's sake. Huh, Rosie?
Maybe snow on the roof, but there's fire in the furnace. Oh, don't kid me. And, you had a brother, was it Ed? That lived, when you lived at the tenant house there?
My brother, yeah, and he's
Jack.
still alive. He's
Jack.
90
Jack, yeah.
93 years old.
Give me some.
He's what?
He's 93. He's down in Newfane Nursing Home.
Oh, boy, yeah. Boy, that was back a long time
That's
ago.
right.
That was during the war, wasn't it?
Right.
It had to be. I'm glad you came because I never would have seen her. I
No,
knew
I
that.
was going to come up and say hello before
I
you left.
couldn't think of your first name, but I remember the last one.
71, 77. Thank you. Thank you all.
How about it? Anybody else got a little something you want to throw in here for that?
And he had a bell there. He had a free house farm. And he says, if I ring the bell, then come on. And the greenhouse got on fire one time. And he rang the bell. It was like he had his own fire sharp in the house. People poured out of the house and had it out.
These kids today, when you tell them that we had to get up off the chair and go over and change the station on the television. Why? Didn't you have a remote? Hell, we didn't have only a black and white. What this thing? Yeah?
Remember, we were RFD6. Imagine sending the trail there now, which is an RFD6. Okay, I think at this point I'm going to have you get up and stretch a little bit, and if you want to talk to Dick or Mary, you're more than welcome to. There's some cookies, there's some coffee. We really appreciate you coming. They certainly appreciate you coming, and hopefully this will be on LCTV. So if you forgot something or didn't hear something, you can see it again. And we thank Judy Naylor. She came to do the whole filming for us, and Dick's son Frank is also here, and he's the one that's doing the program in Wilson. So if you have any questions about that, you can ask him. And we really thank you for coming. Thank you. Feel free to stay and talk to Dick and Mary.
Good to see you.